for both reasons. Totally fine to record. Great. So for I guess both groups here, I just wanted to give you a sense of the types of challenges and problems that we've been approached with over the years, and they tend to fall into one of these kind of buckets we've observed. So naturally, we get a lot of questions around evaluating, understanding impact or outcomes. So trying to understand with data whether an organization's programs are working, and if so, who they're working for. Are they working well for some users and not for others? We've also been asked to help charities and other organizations understand their users. So this might be trying to understand whether the clients or beneficiaries that an organization is serving is representative of the area in their larger community, or if there's a particular group missing. But also kind of more complex questions can be answered with data as well, like looking at client journeys, looking at, you can think of it as kind of client comorbidities. So if you're a service delivery organization, if a client is coming to you with one issue, are they likely to come to you with another issue? We've also tackled projects looking at improving operational efficiency. So if we think about workload or the types of services that an organization is offering, which ones have the biggest impact on outcomes? Can we optimize workflows to achieve better outcomes in less time? That's always the dream. And then predicting need. So can we understand within a client or beneficiary group who's at risk of poor outcomes? Can we anticipate who might be at the greatest need so we can intervene sooner? And that's the problem that I wanted to tell you a little bit more about today. How we approached it, and some advice both for the charity side of things and also for people who might be working with similar organizations. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just tell you a bit about the challenge. So the challenge was really an operational challenge from the Welcome Centre, who are a food bank up in Yorkshire. And they were noticing over the years that many of their clients came only a few times, but a lot of clients, a subset of those clients would come and become dependent on their food parcel services and consume a lot of the resources. So this was just a figure looking at the referrals and food distributed by clients, and the majority of clients came only a handful of times, maybe one or two referrals, but there was a subset who came up to 20 times. Now they did have a support worker who was able to provide like additional support to these clients, but there's only one person, and they would wait until 10 visits to provide that support just because of capacity issues. So they came to us wanting to try to understand whether they could predict in advance who might be at risk of becoming dependent on their services so that they could triage those clients for additional support. So on the next slide, there's just an example of a typical client journey. And actually, you can just go right to the one right after, right? So normally what happens is a client will be referred to this food bank by phone, and a food parcel will be prepared and then collected. Unfortunately, this doesn't necessarily address those underlying issues. So, the food parcel will relieve the immediate crisis, but it doesn't get at some of those more systemic issues that the clients are facing. And so they are able to provide the support, be a bit more proactive, and that can reduce the need for dependency, but it's limited. They have a limited capacity to do this work. So again, the question being, how can we identify those clients who are in greatest need before they get to a point of dependency? So the solution that the volunteer team came up with is on the next slide. And this was using a data science solution to help the Welcome Centre triage their clients. So a team of volunteers worked with the Welcome Centre over the course of think nearly a year to help them develop a model that would give a dependency score. So when a client came in, the workers at the Welcome Center could see whether the client was likely to become dependent on their services or not, and they could use that in their decision making to triage for additional support. So this model took into consideration things like the information about the client, so how long they'd been at their address, if they had information about their family history, but then also behavior patterns. So number of times they'd already been referred to the center, the reason that they were referred, whether they were receiving other services or benefits. And all of this was taken, ingested by the model and used to generate this dependency score, which was then presented in a visual way to the Welcome Center staff so they could use it in their decision making. So in a very short summary, the next slide shows the data science solution, which was that for each client, the workers could see this dependency score and use it in their decision making to predict the future usage, so that clients with a high risk of dependency could be referred to the support worker for additional support. In terms of the impact, we do seem to be making a difference with this approach. So on the next slide, there's a figure looking at the average number of referrals per client over time. So back in 2015, there was around 2.2 referrals per client. You can see that was increasing over time. So just before 2018, each client was being referred up to, on average, about 3 times. And then it starts to plateau. And this orange arrow is when this model was rolled out, giving the support workers additional information on dependency. So again, we can't prove causation here, but it's hopefully indicative that with this additional information on the client's dependency likelihood, they were able to kind of plateau the number of referrals that the clients were generating. So briefly, just what we learned along the way on the next slide. This, I think, applies to both the charities here and also the agencies working with them. So we always want to start with the problem. Here it was so important to talk to the people who are actually kind of client facing about what the issue was on the ground. We never go into an organization looking for a nice data set. We always go into it looking for a nice problem. And to be honest, that's the hardest thing, is finding and really articulating what the problem is. The second tip I would say is consider organizational data maturity. So if you are a capacity building organization yourself, I think one thing to think about as well is whether the culture and leadership of the organization is going to be able to support the maintenance of any solution that you make. And if not, how you're going to factor that in along the way. Incorporate ethics. So we really try to advocate having these difficult conversations about responsible data use out loud and often. So in the case of the Welcome Center, there are all of these discussions to be had about how to explain to clients who is being chosen for this additional support and why somebody might get it for you, for example. And I think, thinking about how you're going to have those conversations and if you're comfortable having those conversations or not, that can indicate ways you might want to change your data science solution. The fourth tip is to upskill current staff. So this kind of relates to the idea that it can be more helpful to invest in people than to invest in expensive tools when you don't have the people to use them. So there's a lot, I think a lot of the time what's needed is sort of time and space for people to develop. And so we really encourage both organizations and the capacity builders working with them to support that, to upskill current staff. And then just to be patient. So again, I think if you're coming from a capacity building perspective, change takes a lot of time. It requires often big shifts in mindset and culture. I think with the Welcome Center, we worked with them over the course of several years, eventually doing this longer term project. And it can just takes time. And so start small and iterate. And I think if you're the organization, again, we often hear from sort of more junior employees versus management, and they might want to completely rewrite the data strategy of the organization, but it can be helpful just to find one thing, show its use, get some buy-in, and iterate. On the next slide, I just had a few more points on advice specifically for capacity builders, like thinking about what I found helpful in scoping out projects. So the first being that it's always so useful to understand the organization's mission or theory of change if they have one. That's really where we start most of our conversations is what are you hoping to achieve? Because that really just drives all of the questions around data gathering and use cases for the solution as well. The other thing is that the process we found is often as or more valuable than the product. So thinking about some of our shorter term projects, I think one of the main benefits for organizations has been just trying to get into that data mindset and understanding how to ask a question and what questions are actually answerable with data. Thinking about even seemingly simple things like quality checking data. I just wouldn't discount the process, and thinking about explaining decision points along the way, I think can be really valuable. The third, I don't think anyone's at risk of doing this here, but just to not be too flashy. In the case of the Welcome Center project, I think we had to integrate with a very old Windows system, for example. And so, bringing in the newest, fanciest tools, A, probably is not affordable, and B, probably isn't necessary. So just bear that in mind. And I just put this again for emphasis in the be patient. All of these things seem to take time. Something I need to remind myself too, that you're largely changing cultures, and that just takes time to do. So be patient. And that was my sort of whirlwind advice, and happy to take a look in the doc and see if there's any questions as well.
Thank you, Dulcie. Yes, David is saying in the chat, great nuggets of tips, which are really lovely. I haven't seen any questions in the doc or in the chat. Just checking. Does anybody have a question that they've been holding and like to ask?
I do have one, if I may. That was great. Thank you. I was wondering what was thinking about, the staff of the trust. What was how the model was received? Because I can see maybe why there might be a bit of skepticism around the model and the calculation, whether there were issues around the language and maybe the way that it was received by the people working at the trust, or whether,
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, so one thing that really helped with buy-in was just that this was never intended to replace a human's decision-making, which I think helped. So it's not like, this came in and we said, okay, we're only going to use the dependency score. It was always brought in as an additional source of information. So that helped the workers along the way see oh yeah, this is kind of agreeing with my intuition, and that helped with the buy-in as well. So I think the fact that this was a tool used to augment human decision-making process versus replace it was helpful, because definitely we've faced that challenge before with organizations where the frontline service folks are like, we don't need this. So I think helping them understand how it can aid their workflow and decision making is beneficial.
Thank you, Dulcie. We've got 2 questions in the chat. I'm just going to go to Mark's question first, David, and then come to yours. But Mark is asking how you make sure data results are attributed to outcomes.
Do you mean like how can you show like a causal relationship? Is that, or
Hi. Yes, I mean it's like you said earlier, you can't prove if it's correlated or causal, but how can you use data to support outcomes and decisions, and show the attribution somehow that there's some sort of relationship? Because it can be really hard. Attribution can be really hard, can't it? So how do you kind of bake that in somehow?
yeah, it's a really difficult question. It's sort of hard to give a sort of one size fits all answer. I mean, I think in the ideal way, you would set up some sort of experiment wherein, like say, it's ethically questionable whether you could do this in the case of the Welcome Center, but where say half the clients are subject to this dependency score and others aren't, and then you can see whether the clients who are triaged via dependency score versus via human do have any improvement in behavior or outcomes. I think that's quite challenging when you're thinking about giving or not giving resources.
Yeah.
So it works better in others. I guess the other way that you can kind of approach it is try to find a similar population who are not given your service. So I'm just thinking around like sort of mentoring charities, for example, who often work with like a subset of a school and are tracking outcomes. All the time, I wish that they were able to get the data on the kids that they're not working with who are from the same school. Like if you can find a similar population, whether it's from the cohort you're working with directly or from like a research group, that can be kind of a helpful proxy when such experiments are like not ethical or practical. But happy to chat through a specific example as well. If there's one on your mind, you can chat offline.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dulcie. Do you have time for one more?
Yep, sure.
Or two potentially. Because David, I wonder if yours is specific and would be easier to have a conversation outside this meeting.
Possibly, yeah. I was talking to a specific charity who are campaigning, got tens of thousands of supporters on their database, and they're curious about how they might make better use of the data, segment the data better. I thought Datakind might be able to help, and they said, well, how would they help? And I said, I'm not sure. So I wondered if it was worth a chat.
Yeah, shoot me an email. I think when it comes to like fundraising challenges, one thing we always try to work across the whole organization, because I think maybe this is controversial, I don't know, but like I think charities always need to fundraise, and sort of you always want to get more money because you always.
This is about fundraising. This is about campaigning to make change around inequality.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, shoot me an email, and I'd love to chat. Yeah.
Thank you. There is one more question from Jane. If you have time, any advice on how to involve the team who are focused on service delivery? So it's a bit of that culture and how you get people on board.
Yeah, I think so. Two different ideas kind of come to mind. The one, so one is with around a project that we're doing right now with a youth mental health charity. We're trying to design a dashboard that allows them to visualize like what young people are talking about, both within their platform and then also kind of broadly in the wild. And so I think one thing that was helpful for them to get the people involved in the service delivery was to just do a bunch of user research around how day-to-day those people would be using this dashboard. So like I would like to use this so that I can understand what new I guess, yeah, what new kind of topics are coming out in conversations from young people after the announcement that there's going to be another lockdown, like very specific use cases, like get them to sort of generate the things that they would want to know from the information. So getting use cases. I think the other thing that I often do when talking to more frontline people is ask them like, what 2 or 3 pieces of information would make your job easier? Like, if only you knew whether this young person was going to drop out next week of your program, then you could, you know, give them some sort of personal development plan or something. So talking about what would make their lives easier, I think, could be simple but helpful.
Those are great tips, fantastic. Yeah, thumbs up from Jane. So thank you so much. And I know you have to go. Thank you, Dulcie, for coming here and whistle stop to what you're working on and answering these questions.
Yeah,
it's
it's a
really
pleasure.
Insightful.
Sorry, I can't stay longer. I've got to jump to another call, but enjoy the rest of the meetup and happy to chat offline.
Great, thank you. See you soon. Yeah, that was. I hope you found that as insightful as I found. Very helpful, practical tips, especially those last one, James. Thank you for asking that question. We're going to hand over to Sam, who's joined us from Effini, and also going to talk about data project they recently worked on, and also sharing hopefully some helpful insights with us. And again, put your questions in the chat or in the doc, and we'll come to them afterwards. Sam, are you happy for David to control slides for you, or would you like to?
That's absolutely fine. That seemed to work well for Darcy. I'll do the same thing.
And did you manage to embed the video or the animation?
I added one extra slide, so it's kind of faked animation, as in we'll just move the slide forward. So okay. I wasn't sure how to, you know, someone else controlling it when you're trying to do animation in PowerPoint. I thought that was a step too far for lunchtime. So
you could have put us to the test and see our skills. And I'm really glad David is doing this bit. But I'm going to hand over to you, so you've got the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start with saying I think you're going to hear a little bit of overlap, which I actually think is really good to hear, because there's some aspects that we do in our projects that Darcy shared there as well. So I think that's probably quite a good sign. So I'm Sam Rhynas. I'm COO at Ifini, which is a data solutions company that's based in Edinburgh. We work with all sorts of different organisations. So we work with charities and public sector. We're currently doing some projects with NHS and Scottish Government. We work with micro businesses in areas such as the creative industries. And then right through to many of the sort of smaller side of the SMEs that are based in the country, working in areas. We've got people that work in the building trade, we have house builders, we have farmers that we've worked with, really broad selection. And we also have some people that are in sort of startups, tech startups, and we try to embed data in right at the very beginning for them. What we actually do for them is different depending on their need. Again, it's all about understanding the purpose. We might do data strategies, we might do roadmaps and actually planning out some of the work, or we might actually do the implementation. So that might be integrating a system for them, it might be creating a dashboard for them, or it might be doing something like automating something, maybe creating a report for them. Automation is a big part of what we do, and we encourage everyone to think about the more tedious aspects of some of the jobs that they have to do and think about how we can automate so they can focus on the really important things and put their mind into that. Today I'm going to share a little bit about a project that we worked on earlier this year with Caring Together. Caring Together are a charity that support carers, and the sorts of services they offer is really broad. It might be information around understanding and accessing things like their rights and their entitlements. It might be training about how to actually do some of the caring skills that they have to deliver for the person that requires them. But they also have another aspect, which is about delivering professional carers into those environments as well, so that they can enable things like respite care and for people to get additional help within their home. That's a really broad remit. And as such, they have lots and lots of information. So Caring Together knew that they had a challenge, and they knew they kind of wanted to move forward. And they came up with a project brief, which I'm not going to read it all out to you, but I'm just going to glance at what I've written because it was a long phrase. They wanted to carry out data analytics integration to allow them to perform strategy and to increase service efficiency and organisational capacity. It's a bit of a mouthful, which is why I couldn't remember it and I had to refer to my notes. The thing is, when we boil that down to what that actually means, that's what we see in many, many organisations. And so that's what I want to talk about a little bit today in a little bit more detail. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So it's all about data for them. And really what we mean by that is the information that they hold within their organisation. And I think any organisation has data or information in many, many forms, and importantly, in many, many systems. And that was the big challenge when we went in and we looked to see what they had within Caring Together. The many different systems that they had built up as their offering changed. So some of that was about information, maybe on a website, or they also have paper copies that needed to get created. So the copy for that needed to be stored. They have telephony systems. People can call up and they can ask for advice or information. So there's the information they give, but there's also the information they might receive from someone on the end of the phone. Really importantly, there's the information about the carers, the professional carers that are actually going out and delivering some of the care for them. So that's going to be their HR information, you know, just in terms of having people in your organisation, all your HR systems. It's going to be about the visits that they need to make, the times of day, the length of time, who it is that they're going to visit. All of that information is actually quite complex. And when it comes to something like care, time is really of the essence. If you have to go and help somebody get out of bed in the morning and get washed, the time is critical. It's not something that can be at some point on Thursday, they're going to turn up. And so having that information efficiently stored and accurately stored and accessible was really important. There's the other aspect, which is around money and thinking about the fundraising that they do and the finances of the company. Again, different system stored all of that information. And then ultimately there's the information about those that need the care as well. And that includes really, personal information about the levels of care they need, perhaps some medical information about the drug regime they might be on, you know, what do they actually need to get given when someone goes out to their house. And so all of that information is sitting in different systems. And if you can imagine that in your own environment, you probably use lots of different systems too, maybe not for the same topics, but it's really easy these days to create data. You can log on and onto your phone and, you know, sign up for an app within minutes and suddenly be entering data into them. And organizations are actually no different. Although they might have a more formal process to choose the system they'll use, ultimately they've had needs at a certain time. They've made choices about what tool is right to use, and they've set up a system. Maybe a few months or a few years later, they've got different needs. They might need to change the system, or they might need to get a new system. And whatever it is, you start ending up with these pots of information that are sitting all over the place. And if we could move on to the next slide, please. The problem with that is trying to access that data. All the individuals within the organisation that were trying to use the data had to go to each of the systems independently. So if you were trying to find out which carer was going to visit a particular patient, and maybe you needed to check back on costs associated with that or contracts associated with that, each system would be different. And that's where we came in. Our goal was to bring all of this together in a more consumable way to make things more efficient, to make things more accessible. And the goal was ultimately to make it a far better service that they would actually deliver out, both for those receiving the care, but actually also their staff who have to give the care. If we could move on to the next slide, please. And so very first thing we did, and I was going to start hitting some of the overlap with what Darcy was saying at this point, understand the purpose. Yes, we are technical. You know, my background is a software engineer. I love the technical side of things, but the importance of understanding what you're actually doing and how it's going to affect the business is massive. Understand the goals of the organisation. Think about all the different tools. We had a detailed list that we developed. And then again, a little bit of overlap here. Understanding what people actually do does not match what you'll get told by senior management. Don't talk to them, talk to the people that are actually doing the day-to-day job. And that might involve sometimes sitting down with someone. So we did all of these things, and part of the questions that we asked people were, what information would help you do your job, do your job better? Would you be quicker at it? Would you be able to react better if you knew something quicker? They all had a different angle, but it was an important question to ask and one we think about every time we work through a project. And we could move on to the next slide, please. And so through all our understandings, what we did was we developed a data strategy. We identified the different things we felt they needed to do, and ultimately it led into building an application for them. We took the systems that we've talked about, not all of them, because we've taken an incremental approach to it, but we created a framework that's in the cloud. There's a database in the cloud, and it's something that can be extended. We can bring more data sources in. I'm really pleased to say we've just kicked off another project with them to bring another data source through. And on top of that, we built dashboards, a dashboard that would actually bring those benefits that people asked for to them. So everyone was looking at a similar view, adaptable depending on your role, but it gave us the visualization onto data that was before it was quite trapped inside the system. If we can move on to the next slide. So this is a screenshot from the actual system that we implemented. It's only a small part of it. There's a lot of other pages that you can drill into the details, but it was just to give you a sense of what were some of those things they asked for. So if we just look at the very first one on the left-hand side, care calls with significant travel. One of the challenges they had was about staff who had to travel quite a long distance to maybe only deliver a 20-minute piece of care. Now, for the patient receiving it, it's hugely important. It doesn't matter how long it is. But for the staff member, they might get frustrated if they've got long journeys for actually a short time period. Perhaps something could be more efficient if someone lives closer. Maybe they're the person that could be sent to do that particular piece of care. And so what this gives them is an up-to-date, it's updated every night. So every morning when you look at this, it's accurate and up-to-date. And they get a sense for where they are. Are they improving? They can drill down and understand what they did last week. Have they got less people who are traveling the longer distances? In this case, they picked 30 minutes. It made sense. I'm not going to go through all of the other ones, but obviously you'll be able to look at them in the slides anyway, so you'll get a sense of what we did. This was all what it was about. Create a dashboard. You can glance at it at any point during the day and get a sense of where you are. Then you can drill down and start to understand the details. So you could look at who it was that was going to particular calls. How would you change that? So if I could move on to the next slide, please. So again, what did we learn from doing this experience? We hadn't worked in this particular area before, so it was a really interesting one for us. And that assumption about everyone within one organisation all having the same awareness and the same knowledge about what was happening, never make that assumption, because you'll have a conversation with one person, you think you've got it all sussed, you do something, and a week later you have a conversation with a different person, and it turns out there's inconsistencies inside the business. So that was a big learning for us. Make sure you get a broad range of opinions and thoughts to make sure you kind of get it right. Small incremental steps. We say that to all our clients. Don't try to take a massive leap. That sometimes stops you because it just seems like a big hurdle. Our roadmaps we develop are really important for that. We can see a planned approach to it, and it makes it feel more manageable. This getting started part was one of the slower parts, and sometimes on a data project that's inevitable. Governance needs to be dealt with. This is personal data, and in some cases extremely personal data when you think about the patient information, and so that's important to understand. Governance takes time and is a key part of a data project. Start that as early as you possibly can. That's a big learning we've had along the way. Sharing the bad ideas. Right, we do not come up with perfect visuals. First of all, I start with pens and paper on my desk and plan it out. Don't think you're going to do all these things perfectly, and share them with a client, because often they'll see that thought process, and either they'll pick up on it and actually have a much better idea than you did because they understand the data better, or actually they just know that it's an evolution of these things, so that when you present something back, they don't think you're telling them, this is it, it's brilliant, I've done it. And none of us create work that's perfect the first time round. Involve them, get their feedback, and it's a good way to get that engagement piece. And the last point on here is about sustainability of solutions. What we never want to do is go in and do quite an intensive piece of work, get a lot of people investing time, and then have something that they don't use later. You know, they all love it, they all think it looks brilliant, but 6 months later, well, we don't really know where to go with it. We don't really know how to use it. It's not clear to us. You need to think about how that will work as part of the requirements. Embed it into their daily activity. It's really important, and it brings more value to it when you're thinking about that. The time spent is an investment into what you're doing. It's not just a one-off project. And if we could move on to my last slide, please. Again, a little bit of advice here in terms of what you're thinking. This is following on from the point I was making there. How are you actually going to embed, in this case, dashboards into your daily activity? Whenever we create a data visualization, we're about showing an insight. It's not just about presenting back and seeing a big bar chart that says it's at this number. What is the insight that you can gain from it? And when you know that, what are you going to do with it? If you don't have an answer to that, you need to really think clearly about whether or not you're doing the right thing, because it has to have an action. It's not just about presenting information. The plan for the sustainability extends a little bit beyond what I've talked about, but also thinking about stuff like costs. Now, when we're working with somebody like a charity, that's all the more important. It's important for any organisation, but think about the costs. So we put that into a cloud environment. So there's an ongoing cost associated with that. Maybe your data is going to grow, maybe you're going to integrate more sources. Whatever that is, think about the costs so you can plan and manage for those. And then the last one is also a bit of an overlap, because I completely support what Darcy said. Give the opportunity to your existing staff. It's amazing the skills and the interests that people have, and an opportunity to maybe learn something. This was Power BI that we used, and the cloud environment was Azure. Give them the opportunity. It might be a far more cost-effective way for the organisation, but also giving them the development opportunity to actually grow into it. We did it in another organisation. They had a business analyst who'd never used Power BI before. He is now way better at using Power BI than I am. He's an absolute whiz, because he was given time and he was given that allowance to really invest in his training for that. And he's doing a brilliant job. And the whole goal there was allow, again, a little bit of sustainability, not necessarily about having us back to do all the future work. Rather, think about having someone internal that can build their skills and maybe start implementing some new dashboards as different requirements and different questions come up. So a little bit of a whistle-stop tour there. I hope that was helpful. I'm happy to ask any questions that I can around that. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, great. And yeah, really resonates with what Dulcie was saying. And it's just really a good reminder about that taking small steps, not wanting to be perfect, you know, and having lots of conversation with people who are doing the work, to make sure that what you develop is actually making their life easier. We're a little tight for time. Were there any questions? We can take a couple, but I want to make sure we've got time for shout outs as well. Having a look across. Oh, thanks, David. Any questions?
And if anyone has something, you can. I'm sam@ifini.com if you want to drop me an email or anything.
I think that was the challenge with splitting it out. Normally we do the talks and then questions, but because Dulcie had to go, she might have gotten all the questions, Sam. Nothing at the moment. All right. Thanks for offering to take things off outside this meeting, Sam. And I think you've added your email address to the slide deck, and that's shared as well afterwards. So people can get in touch. Thank you so much. But I'm amazed. It's always like having so many different data sets and then, you know, bringing them together. It's a big project. So yeah, so it's good, and it's good to hear that you're taking incremental steps even on that with Karen together.